Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. If you are new here, it's always such a pleasure to have you on. And to the regular guests, oh my goodness, I love you all so much. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. I appreciate the support. We are growing bigger and bigger every single time, and it's only because of you. You share, you introduce people to the show, and I am forever grateful. A reminder that if you aren't doing so, remember to follow us on the following social media platforms: on Twitter and Instagram at The Root of the Sci Pod. You can follow us on Facebook and also on the LinkedIn page at The Root of the Science podcast. Most importantly, make sure that you subscribe to one of the podcast platforms such as your Apple Podcast or Spotify, so that you are notified when a new episode drops, right? And also a gentle reminder that you can support this show. Please support the show. As an independent podcaster, it goes a long way getting support. There you can click on the support the show link and you can drop me a few or a lot of bucks on the PayPal link. Thank you so much. Now let's get into today's episode, shall we? My guest today is Dr. Brunette, who is originally from Zimbabwe and now currently based in Switzerland. In this episode, we learn that she's a postdoc at the University of Liege in Switzerland, and she shares about her research on helminth infections and respiratory viruses. If, like me, you don't know what that is, tune in because she breaks it down, and it's some pretty exciting research. We also chat about why she got into the science and some of the perks of being an academic, like traveling. Tune in for all of this and so much more. Let's go. Hi, Brunette. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Anne. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you on today and for us to get to know more about you and for us to chat. So let's get the formalities out of the way. Who is Brunette? Where you from? Where you currently based? And just briefly, what do you do?
So I'm an immunologist. I'm a scientist by profession. My full name is Brunette Katsandegwaza. Don't try pronouncing the surname. You're going to tongue twist yourself. But it's two surnames that the registrar just combined into one. So to be simply just call me Brunette Katsande. That's the first surname that I should be using. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe. Yeah, I did my first degree in Zimbabwe at the University of Zimbabwe. And then I went to Brussels with a scholarship from the Flemish government. That's why I did my master's in Brussels. And then I finalized my studies in Cape Town at HCT. That's why I did my PhD. And currently I'm in Liege in Belgium at the University of Liege. And what do I do? That's a good question, no?
We used to be what do I do?
Sometimes when you're in academia or in research, you absolutely have no idea what you do. You just know that you do some basic stuff, which is common. So I think that is what I do.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. No, we're going to get into more detail. I think we'll expand further, but we can start there. You are an immunologist. When you were telling us of where you've done your academic journey, your academics rather, in the various different countries, it's always quite interesting to hear that from people. And I wanted to ask you, so okay, obviously before we get into the science, this is like a side question. You obviously have had an opportunity to travel the world, and you said you love to travel, and as you travel, you also love good food. So I can imagine
these are the perks of actually being in academia, right? Where it's afforded you the opportunity to travel, and dare I say, for free sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
So is that like one of the best parts?
Yeah, sure. That's one of the best parts of academia. And I don't want to lie, I think it's also one of the reasons why I like academia. And I was motivated, besides being paid to study.
There's that too.
There's that too, yeah. Because it seems like everything is free and you get to learn, go out sightseeing, learning new things and seeing new things. But I think this is the nice part about academia. You tend to travel, you go to conferences, local, international, but then you also tend to switch universities. This is if you're interested in switching universities, or if you've got that opportunity to switch universities and also switch countries. Right. So it was one of my main goals that I'll never do 2 degrees at the same university. I've never done more than 1 degree at the same university. It's always been at different universities in different countries, mostly because I like traveling and food. Wow. I mean, like, I'm a food tourist. If I wasn't an academic, I'll be a food tourist.
Yeah.
I like food. I like eating different foods.
No, wow, this is so cool, Brunette. Where were you when I was an undergrad, or even after I finished high school, so you can convince me to travel the world? You know, it's actually happened where the more I speak to people, the more I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know, I could have been traveling different countries for my degrees, and look at you now. Like, I hope somebody else is inspired and gets to be motivated like you, to kind of be like, oh no, okay, actually these are the perks of being in academia.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think people should go for it. I always advise some of the guys who come after me from my first university in Zimbabwe that, listen, you don't need to do your master's in Zimbabwe. I'm not saying that it's poor education. I'm saying that you just need exposure, academic exposure. But besides that, you also end up getting to experience different countries, which is not only good for academics, it's also good for you as a person. You tend to experience different countries, different cultures. It just opens up your mind, you know. You also start seeing other academics in different countries and how they think, how they view academia, what they think they're going to do with academics, right? Because this is something that we're going to talk about eventually, I know, on this podcast today. But it comes back to, what are your options as an academic in Africa? See, if you're not really exposed to what options are there in academia, you won't know what you're going to do after your first degree, or after your second degree, or after your PhD. It's because you haven't been exposed to other opportunities that are there, right? So I'm grateful that this traveling actually helped me to see the different things that I've seen at the moment.
And that's true. You make such an important part. I think it's not a lack of not wanting to go and to do all of these things, but it's a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of visible role models. It's a lack of, like what I'm saying, like, where were you? Where was a Brunette in my life who was telling me and convinced? Because I love food too. So
that's
like,
nice. We're kindred spirits.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that I want to do. So if it's to a country to go and eat, I would have been like, yes how do I apply? How do I apply? So I it's really cool that you do what you do. But okay, fine, let's take it to the very beginning then, because you said that before you were this globe trotter and traveling the world for academia, how did you get into the science? Was it something that you knew that this is what you want to do, or was it something that kind of just, happened?
I think I kind of like knew what I wanted to do, but then it also just fell into place. I mean, we don't want to lengthen the stories, but when you're young, you've got a bias towards certain things. We used to keep chickens at my mother's house, and sometimes the chickens would break their legs, and then I would put a cast on them, you see. And my mother always thought I was going to be a medical doctor, of which I do not like medicine at all.
Wow, okay.
It's not like I hate medicine, but I don't think I'm good with people as patients. I don't like touching bodily fluids, you see. So I think this is one of the things why I never applied for medicine. But then in high school and in secondary school, I was always very good in biology. So I ended up taking for my A levels in Zimbabwe. But A levels where you just have to do 3 subjects, right? And I ended up taking biology as the major, with maths and chemistry, of course. And then it is that they gave me a Bachelor of Science General, and I got an honors afterwards in biology. So I think everything was just streamlined towards science, and I love science. It's one of the things that I didn't need to study in school. I mean, I could study everything else, but, I could just wake up and go and write a science exam and I'd get an A. That's how much I love science. I used to read science books like novels. You see, my dad would always feel like, yeah, crazy. I'll just sit the whole day reading a science book or a biology book like a novel, and then go like, okay, I'm done with this one. So this is how I got into science. And then but to get into immunology, I got into immunology during my master's, actually. So this is why I'm actually proposing or encouraging people to travel, because if I wouldn't have gotten this opportunity in Zimbabwe, right? I got my scholarship to do a master in biology at VUB in Brussels. It didn't have the immunology component, right? So the final year of your master's, different professors would then suggest the projects that they have in their labs, or future us master students could choose the project that we like to do. But then my degree and the degree program that I was doing was more of human ecology. It was ecology, looking at the environment, human social behavior and stuff like that. It had nothing to do with health. And then, so I didn't find a topic that I liked, right? Then I went into the director. I don't like any of these topics. I think I like to do something along health. Then they were like, oh, Brunette, it's not a health master's, You have to choose what to give. Yeah. Then I'm like, no, give me a moment. So I just went to another office, to another professor. And I went like, I'm looking for a project. Then this professor asked me, from which program are you from? Then I went like, master's in biology. Then they went like, oh yeah, students from masters in biology don't get projects from biomedical sciences. I just went like, give me the chance. And then they gave me the chance. That's why I started doing immunology. Like literally, I didn't even done any immunology course. I just started with it from my master's, from my project. And then I got there, and then they introduced me to B cells and T cells. And I've been in this field until now.
Wow. Also, it just shows how brave you are because that's 2 very contrasting fields, and you have to learn new concepts and, and all of that stuff that was it as easy as you make it sound? Like, okay, I left and then here I am now. Like, because I'm just sitting here shocked, like, what?
It wasn't easy because my director from my master's in biology program told me that, Brunette, you're wasting our time. They're not even going to accept you, right? Because you don't have the background knowledge in that field. And that professor from biomedical sciences accepted me. He went like, Brunette, you can come. They can teach you from scratch. Of which they didn't really teach me from scratch, but I learned from scratch. I was sleeping on the laptop. I was reading every night. So it wasn't easy, but it's doable, right? I look at it now, I go like, oh, it's not that difficult. Anyone who wants to do it can do it.
And also, I think, how you explained earlier that when you were younger, you used to consume science content like novels. So your affinity to learn was always there. And I think that obviously helped you in absorbing all of this new knowledge. So yeah, maybe you were like, when you were younger, you were sort of preparing yourself for this particular field.
I think so.
Yeah. I think that's sort of, that's the way that I look at it, because you never know, like, and it obviously requires somebody who's very motivated, and you're very motivated to do it. And look at you now, completely different. That's absolutely, that's absolutely amazing. So then you did your master's in that, and then you came to South Africa to do your PhD, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then currently now you are a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Liege. So obviously you've gone through the process. Oh my gosh. I say this as I am going through the process of the PhD. And, as cliche as this question may sound, but what are some of the things in your personal journey that you learned that grew you like obviously because you obviously had to grow. And another thing that I don't think they mention too much in doing a PhD that also breaks you. And and how did this sort of shape the researcher who you are now, even as a postdoc, or fellow, if you don't mind sharing?
I think let me look at things that grow you first. If you get to move, like you change universities, you always get to a new university as the new person, You're lost, you don't know what you're doing, but then you have to survive, So I think moving, having a new experience or a new exposure is actually going to grow you because it's going to teach you to adapt to a different environment and still get your goal. So I really like this part about my life because I've been moving around. Yes, one of my friends from Kenya always says academics are nomads. We're academic nomads. You can't sit still in one place. But then it also builds your character because you end up having to learn how to be an extrovert. You learn how to communicate. You learn how to make friends. You learn how to focus on the important stuff. Because when I moved from Zimbabwe to Brussels for my master's, this was the first time that I ever left Zimbabwe, right? And then I got there in Brussels. I'm an independent person, and then they just give me all this money, poof, years, scholarship money. You see, you manage it for yourself. And I've never managed my own money in my whole life. This was the first time. So you learn how to manage yourself. You now learn how to become an independent person. But then as a scholarship student, you also learn how to talk to people from different countries with different cultures and different experiences. So this actually prepared me for my journey to my PhD. When I moved to Cape Town, I wasn't afraid of moving. And I won't lie to you, I'm not afraid of moving, right? I'm not afraid of doing that. I'm actually like new challenges. I like meeting new people. I like making new friends. Of which is not always that smooth, but then it's also a learning curve. It grows you as a person. It grows you. It makes you more independent, but also you also learn how to depend on other people to help you because you want to know what's happening in that university. You want to know what's happening in that country. You need the people who are there before you to guide you, right? So you learn how to depend on people for certain stuff, and then you also learn how to be an independent person. And this has actually helped me to grow as a researcher because there are times when I need to be dependent on my colleagues for my research, and then there are times I need to make my own personal decisions for my own research career, right? So now I have to learn how to make connections and network with different people from different countries. Oh yeah, this is one of the interesting things about going to different universities. I mean, you get a huge network. If I tell you I've got friends from Kenya, I've got friends from Brussels, I've got friends from Peru, these are all colleagues that I learned with. These are colleagues that you can call upon when you actually start your own research group or you actually want to go in a certain direction. You can just call them, hey, this is Brunette. We did our masters together. Yeah, I would love to know what you think about this because I know that you're not specializing in this field. You see? So it actually helps your own academic career and then you grow, right? The challenges also come from the moving part. It's difficult. It's difficult to integrate in some societies. It's difficult to always drop friends and then go and make new friends. It's difficult starting again from zero. I always think that when you move, you go to somewhere else during the journey. When you go from a master's to your PhD, after your master's, you've arrived, right? You are done. But then when you go to a PhD, you go to grade zero. You go down again, right? You become that. You become like a new student. So that's the challenge. You have to learn how to relate with the new team, with a new boss potentially, and the new admin at your university, at that new university or new institution. So I think there are some things that can break you. It can break your motivation, break your mental health, and there's also a loss of social fabric. Because when I moved, I didn't mention this, but when I moved to do my master's in Brussels, I left behind my first kid. She was 10 months old. I had to leave her with her dad and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law stepped in to take care of my kid. Then I had to go to Brussels for 2 years. So I missed about 2 years in my kids' life when they were young. That I could just see pictures of her starting to walk, starting to talk. And
Yeah, sure.
which is challenging. It's like you have to sacrifice a part of you. This is the downside of academia, because we tend to move a lot, or the system makes it as move for us to improve our own careers. You tend to lose a lot on the social side, the family connections, you tend to miss out. I think so. This is why sometimes you see that academics are usually regarded as funny people. Like they don't really have friends, but it's not because you don't want to have friends, it's because it's the system that has moved us from one place to the other. I think that's the hugest challenge, and some people, that's why they're not motivated to move, of which I actually understand that, given the chances, so I think if we had more than 1 or 2 lives, I would end up deciding, okay, should I move or shouldn't I move? It's one of the most important questions that you have to consider in academia.
Wow. No, you've said so many things, and I think so many people who have gone through what you've gone through can relate, be it the good part, the things that have grown you, like in terms of your networks and stuff. And honestly, I think, like you said, that in later on in life, all these amazing people who you've had the opportunity to meet as you study, you can now call on them, and they're big deal people, and you can be like, oh no, I have a friend, they're the director of this of this institute, or they're what of this lab. Now just drop them a text, and it's a nice flex, that you can easily do that. But also at the same time, especially with what you said, that it also does take away from you like the social fabric of like you're missing out on important moments, particularly for you with your family and your children. And I think that's also one of the many things that many people who, as much as it's nice to travel, it's difficult and it affects them. But I think in life, anything great comes with a lot of challenges and a lot of drawbacks, but that's part of the process, right? That is honestly part of the process. And I mean, it defines of who you are and how you've gotten here, and that's where the story is. And I think it's also important to share the good and the bad, but we're still grateful, like you said, still grateful for where you are and and the opportunities that you've gotten. Yeah. So initially you said, okay, Anne, I don't know what I do. I do a lot, but I'm an immunologist. So now we're going to talk about what you do. So as far as I'm concerned, you are an experimental infectious disease researcher. And one of the things that you're currently working on is on understanding the impact of prior helminth infections on the pathology of a respiratory virus. Okay. I don't know what helminth infections are. So can you please tell us more about this work, and also why is it so important? So just give us an overview for some of the people who are some of us who are not in the health sciences field.
Okay, so in simple terms, helminths are what you call worms. Like if someone is infected with worms.
Oh, okay.
Like the ones that cause bilharzia or roundworms or whatever, tapeworms. I think this is the basic terminology that we use in simple terms.
Okay, I understand.
They're called helminths because of the parasitic worms. That's how they're called helminths. So the premise of my research actually is based a little bit on the hygiene hypothesis, but also is also looking at potential diagnostics. So on the hygiene hypothesis side, to put it in simple terms, the hygiene hypothesis postulates that people who are born in like dirty environments, like people from poor backgrounds, are actually exposed to a lot of infectious diseases when they're young, or infectious agents, which primes their immune system and then protects them against future infectious conditions or future non-communicable disease. So this hypothesis came about when they're trying to understand why, for example, this is an example, it's not as specific, but why, for example, we've got people coming from Africa where it's endemic for many diseases, malaria, helminths, whatnot, what is, and then you get your first infection the moment you're born. The moment you're born, you're already eating something that is infectious. But then you see a long prevalence of non-communicable diseases like cancer and stuff. And then if we come to a more recent setup, even when it was expected that, COVID-19 would extremely ravage the whole of Africa, we're a little bit more protected, right?
Yes,
and this wasn't because of vaccines. We did not really have a good vaccine penetrance in Africa, but it almost seems like there was a natural protection, right? And to a certain extent in most developing countries compared to the developed countries, right?
Yeah.
Even if we all got exposed to the same strains of the virus. So research has actually showed that if you have a helminth infection, a prior helminth infection, it primes the immune system, right, to modulate or to suppress overreaction to future infections or to future diseases like autoimmune diseases, right? So in this instance, my research is looking at a prior. By prior, I mean that you get infected first. Like what usually happens, when babies are now crawling, they eat soil and everything, so they get to ingest worm eggs. And parasites, usually they adapt to your system in such a way that they become permanent residents of you. Literally, you can't clear them out.
Okay.
So that early infection and then the permanency sometimes of the helminth within the host, which is you, the human being, is then has been shown to prevent, for example, asthma or cancer or colitis, which is known also as inflammatory bowel diseases. This is a postulation, right? It's not 100% proof because there are some confounding factors. Where if by confounding factors, we say sometimes if we cannot really say helminths prevented COVID-19 in Africa, that's why we've got low numbers. But sometimes we might have low numbers of COVID-19 people because there was underreporting. You understand?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. It's a theory. It's a postulate, right? This is what happens. So my research then takes these ideas, then we experiment with it in the lab. So what we do is that I work with mice. I'm a murine researcher. I work with mice. Then I infect my mice with helminths or worms. Then after about 6 days or 30 days, I infect with the virus. So the virus that I'm using at the moment is a respiratory virus. We infect directly into the lung. It's almost like someone's just getting like a flu or something. But I will actually work with a virus known as respiratory syncytial virus, right, known as RSV. This virus is mostly prevalent in babies and then in adult people or people with immune-compromised systems. So most of the times when you see babies below 2 years, they get this pneumonia and they say it's a viral infection. Some babies die. Some babies survive it. And usually it's because of this virus known as RSV, right? So we want to see if a helminth infection can modulate the outcome of a viral infection. So we infect with the virus and then we monitor the mice to see if they get sick or they don't get sick. So the preliminary results that we found is that if mice are infected with helminths before you infect with the virus, they actually don't get sick, right? And they don't die, right? So which is good, right? Which is good because it's supporting what has been postulated that people in Africa or people in developing countries with helminth infections are refractory to viral infections. They may have the virus, but they don't die from it. And like if you get a baby from America with the same virus, they're going to die because they do not have something prior that primed their immune system. So that is the hygiene hypothesis part side of it. But then when it comes to diagnostics, we want to look at the mechanism at how this protection is coming about. How does a prior helminth infection protect against the viral infection, right? Once we know the mechanism of how that is happening in the immune system, this has got the potential to be translated into humans because at the moment we've got big pharma companies struggling to find a vaccine for RSV. RSV is not a new virus. It's a virus that has been there forever. But we still do not have a vaccine for it. Most kids who get RSV are only treated for the symptoms. They're not given any treatment for the viral infection itself. Right? So they're mostly put on oxygen tanks, just to help them breathe, because they suffer from a lot of respiratory distress, which ends up killing these babies. So we want to contribute to the knowledge that will provide an intervention, right, for us to use a certain mechanism which is employed by helminths to suppress someone who's infected with RSV from suffering and dying. So that's the diagnostic part that this research that I'm doing can feed into.
Wow, my goodness, I'm like so fascinated by this. It's such interesting research, especially like you said, that health hygiene theory, and I mean, it's something that I didn't know, but it makes a lot of sense when you put it like that. And I think it, like you said, without the confounding factors, outing and etc., some of the things that happened during COVID, it does now. I think we now have the why, or the why in inverted commas. And I think the most interesting thing now that I like about this research, and I think as any scientist, is like, okay, we have the why, but now we want to understand the mechanism, like how exactly, what does it exactly do in the body, and what makes it, so work the way that it does. This is just me asking you like a question that came into thought now. You said initially that some of these the health hygiene theory, we said that because of these parasitics, that things that were happening with people who are living in unhygienic areas, for example, it had some potential of preventing them with cancers and whatnot. Can we maybe now say that, like how people of color, for example, because like cancer was most prevalent with, white people, etc. And now that there isn't like a resurgence or a surgence of where people are moving in like they're being more urbanized now, and they're moving out of these unhygienic areas, and now you're seeing a lot more people getting some of these diseases that people in the olden days or were not getting. So this is a theory, right? Could this sort of now explain some of the things why we're experiencing what we're seeing in some of these diseases that were not affecting people back in the day, possibly with this same theory?
Yeah, so it actually partially explains that, because which is sound, of course, because whenever I think there's this basic thinking that science and social science do not mix, like the science and social science don't mix, but they actually mix. The social behavior of people actually gives an idea of why you're getting certain results in science, right? So yes, this is one of the things that have actually been suggested. The urbanization of developing countries. You're urbanizing and you're changing your diets. You're becoming too clean. See. Your kids are no longer being exposed to some environment that you grew up in. But then mostly, it might also just be the thing that now we've got more reporting and more better diagnosis of cancers. Like our ancestors were dying of cancer, but they did not know what they were dying of. But I know that there's been different research trying to see whether it was just underreporting back then, or actually there's been an increased incidence of cancer. And if you look at most publications coming from Africa on cancer, they're all agreeing on one thing: there's an increased incidence of cancer in Africa. So we need to know why, and the why might be because of that. We're eradicating most of these health pressures that we used to have. Like now we're getting treatments for helminths at a young age. Every kid is being dosed in school. You can get the drug over the counter and stuff like that. I would like to put a disclaimer and say, I'm not saying that you shouldn't treat a helminth infection. In as much as parasites might be good for you, they're also quite detrimental. You see kids with elephantiasis. I think you've seen this condition where someone has got a swollen leg, which is very fat, one leg, but then the other one is normal, the other one is fatter. So this is also because of a parasite, you see. So in this instance, we cannot say, okay, we're not going to treat you of this parasite because we want you to be protected from cancer. When the person is failing to walk or their quality of life is reduced. So everything has got a pro and cons. Here we only look at the pros of how helminths have provided a health pressure or an immunology pressure on your immune system, on the host immune system, which then suppresses the prevalence or the outcome of cancers and other conditions. But on the other side, parasites are also detrimental to human health. So there's a balance that is needed. But to get back to the cancer issue, yes, of course, yes, it has been suggested that the difference in the way that we're now living our lives in Africa compared to our ancestors might be contributing to the increased incidence of things like colon cancer, cervical cancer, and almost all the different cancers we're currently seeing in Africa.
Wow, so fascinating. I could talk to you forever about this because, but we don't have the time. Okay. So we've been talking a lot about cancer and in that previous question that I was asking you about it. And I'm just going to pull the string a little bit further because you've actually mentioned, and I think you can hear it with the type of research that you're doing, that it might also lead you into this path that in future you'd like to embark specifically on cancer research, but like now focusing on how we can harness African traditional medicines to combat cancer. So, you're an African scientist at your core. Do you think then it's very important to bring in this African indigenous knowledge into this, Western science system that you're currently in?
Science has got no boundaries.
Yeah,
so science has got no boundaries. It has got no biases. I mean, of course, yes, there are some regions which focus on different types of science. But I think it's high time that we start looking more inside. We should start having our own homegrown solutions.
Yeah.
If you besides being a scientist, I'm also a human being. I was in Zimbabwe a few years ago, I think in 2019, 2020, after my PhD.
Yeah.
And it was quite a sad scene, you meet your friend, like, oh, yeah, where are you rushing to? Oh, I'm going to the main hospital. My aunt has got cancer, right? And you meet that person. Oh, yeah, my brother got cancer. Oh, yeah, my father got cancer. It's one of those dreaded diseases that we now have in our society. And the unfortunate part is that we're all depending on chemotherapy drugs that we actually don't know how they work, and it's all imported stuff. And then these chemotherapy drugs are also quite expensive. I mean, we're talking about an economy that is quite poor in Zimbabwe, and then you get treatment being suggested to be $5,000. And this person is earning $100 a month. There's no way they're going to raise $5,000 for cancer treatment. So I'll talk more about Zimbabwe because this is where I've been, but I think this also applies to other African countries.
Of course.
Like getting a cancer diagnosis is a death sentence. It's one of those things that you go like, okay, so you've just been told that your relative is going to die. We don't really know when. It depends on the stage, and there's no exit, you see. And the painful part about it, especially to me, is that no one is immune. Cancer is not a disease that you acquire, like through social behavior. You cannot say, okay, I behave very well, so I'm immune to cancer. You see, this is something that you can just wake up, you have a headache, or you've got this, or Brunette, you've got cancer. Oh, shit, I'm in Zimbabwe, I'm dying.
And it happens like that.
And it happens like this, you see. And it's one of the diseases that I'm mostly afraid of, because we start grieving for you while we are still alive.
Yeah.
See, we know the moment you're told that diagnosis, we're already grieving for you because you're not getting out of their life. Of course, yes, there are chances that you're going to be better, but those chances are quite minimal. So I think that because like we were discussing earlier on, right? I think you mentioned something about, our ancestors were not suffering from this disease.
Yeah.
Was it because they were not suffering, or they knew how to treat them?
Yeah.
This is the most important question that we have, because we have people that have been treated. I'm not saying that I know one or two people, but it's from spoken. No, it's a spoken conversation. Someone will go like, oh, yeah, I'm anti-cancer. Then she was treated traditionally, right, using traditional medicines, using traditional herbs. And I'd like to think that all drugs, even the ones that are being used currently in chemotherapy, they all came from somewhere, right? So if our own traditional herbs and our own traditional methods could cure cancer, if we could use plants, mostly I'm focusing on ethnobotany, but like we've got plants that have been shown that they've got some anti-tumor, right? Anti-tumor, which is anti-cancer activity, but it has never been tested. It's always thought of. Okay, we can't really prove that it works, but someone says it works. Why can't we test if it works? This is my question. I want to test if it works or it doesn't work. Let me also say a disclaimer here. We're not going to test it on human patients. I'm an experimental scientist, which means that we're only going to set up experiments using cancer lines. You understand? Cancer cell lines, which are not human. They're from humans, of course, but it's not a human being.
Yeah.
It's cancer cell lines. This is how you screen for different activity of your herbs or your traditional concoctions or stuff like that. I know that sometimes it might seem far-fetched, but I would like to let you know that most biofarmers are actually looking to tropical areas for the next thing, for the next treatment for many things.
Oh, wow.
So we might laugh it off and say, oh, this is traditional, or this is what. Let's separate the traditional religion from the traditional aspect of treatment, right? And we see if we can harness some of our own herbs, maybe find bioactive chemicals which are anti-cancer or anti-tumor. And then the question comes like, do I want to bring the traditional aspects that we have of treating into the Western science?
I mean, there is work that's currently being done with people who are focusing on medicinal plants, right?
True.
To treat cancer, to treat cancer, like you said, not in humans yet, but like you said, during the lines. And in fact, it reminds me, recently, I was actually just quickly going through my episodes right now, because I was like, wait, I spoke to somebody who is doing a couple of weeks ago, I think sometime in, okay, not weeks, but like a couple of months ago. Her name was Talita. She's actually working on medicinal plants to treat cancer, I think, and somebody else who was also looking at pancreatic cancer. So I think there is that movement, like you said, that into us looking internally, into looking at what were the ancestors doing. I think what I really loved earlier, what you said, was that were they not getting these diseases, or did they already know how to treat them? And I think that's what indigenous knowledge is that it's somebody somewhere knows,
Exactly,
they know there is that knowledge, but it's just not being it's indigenous, and sometimes we're losing that knowledge. And it's important, I think, what my question, or rather it was just to get your take on the idea of us looking at that. What were they doing? Like, what's going on? Or all these stories that you also say that there are people who say, no, so-and-so was treated traditionally. Like, what exactly? And I think as scientists, that's our curiosity. How does it work?
Yeah.
How can we do it? And I'm sure that's the type of research that you want to go into, the same way that you're doing it now with the worms. Okay, we have this theory, but how exactly? What is the mode of action, et cetera, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's my point. I mean, like, we've got the indigenous knowledge. We've just have a poor transfer of indigenous knowledge from the knowledge people to us who don't know, right? And we don't know how to assimilate indigenous knowledge into current research science.
Sure.
So this is what I'm hoping that we'll start shifting towards to as Africans, as African scientists. We cannot be on the receiving end all the time. We cannot be saying, give us this drug, give us this drug. when we've got our own drugs that will work
in our
I know
backyard.
that is a huge leap. Yeah, I know that is a huge leap. To be honest with you, I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist.
Me too.
I've dealt with pessimists.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've dealt with pessimists who are going to tell me, oh, you don't even have the money, you don't have the facilities, you don't have the expertise. But then the thing is, how did they start?
Yeah.
How did those people start? Like, where do you start looking? Everything has to go back to ground zero, right? And you already have ground zero. You've got indigenous knowledge. You've got someone who knows that you mix this herb with this herb. You cook it for 2 hours, you sieve it, you leave it outside, and then you give it to the person for 3 days. You see? So that is the knowledge that we are missing, that we have, but we need to standardize it, right? We need to standardize it and test it. So this is where my expertise comes in, because I can do in vivo research. I'm an immunologist. I can do murine experiments. You can actually induce cancer in mice, right? Or you can just transfer cancer cells into mice, and then you track them. You give them different, we call them a different media to drink, or you just inject them with different chemicals, and then you see whether your cancer is going to grow or it's going to shrink. What happens to your cancer cells after you treat them differently in your different mice, right? So this is the basis that I'm coming from. Like, we can screen these traditional herbal medicines if we want to. And I think this is important because when you look at COVID-19, this is not like, I know this is controversial, but when you look at COVID-19, you see one of the ways that China was trying to control COVID-19 is that they actually, advise people to depend more on their traditional herbs and traditional medicines.
Yeah.
Right. So people were using their traditional herbs, which were actually being regulated, by the government. Like, okay, this one is helpful, this one is not helpful. Why can't we do that?
Yeah.
Why can't Africans do that?
Why? That is the question. And I think it's something that we can do. And I think, like you said, I'm an optimist too. Having researchers and scientists like yourself who are optimistic, who are wanting to start from ground zero, who are like, let's take charge. I think there is something positive in the future. And there's so many people who have seen the potential. We've got extremely smart people,
True.
we are, I think as Africans, one thing that we are is we're also very resourceful. We find ways of doing it. So I'm excited to see in future what exactly you do and how it contributes to the body of research for this particular body of knowledge. And it's such important work on a intellectual, on a societal, on a lot of scales. And at the core of it, as scientists, we do science for society. And
True, we have to give back.
Yes,
we have to give back to the society that we came from.
Precisely.
We're not. I think this is going to answer one of the questions that maybe you're potentially going to ask me, like, what is the advice that we are going to give to someone who's interested in STEM?
Yes, go ahead.
Right, yeah. I think, this is actually what motivated me to come to this podcast, because of my experience, my own personal experience. You get to a time when you self-introspect and go like, why did I get a PhD? Right? Why am I an immunologist? Like, what am I doing at the moment, right? I think it's time we give back to the society that we came back from. I know that many people study for different reasons, right? You study because you like doing sciences, or you like doing biology, or you study because you're good at it. You study to run away from poverty. This is one of the main reasons that we have in Africa. Let's be candid and to accept it. We study to get away from poverty.
Yes.
Getting out of poverty to get better jobs, right? But eventually, after you finish your studies never end. People always assume that once you get your PhD, you're done. No, you're not done. You always learn something. You always learn something new every day. So after you think you've gotten to the goal that you're aiming for in your studies, right? What do you want to do with yourself as a scientist? Do you want to continue in academia to do research? What kind of research? You should think about that. Do you want to go into industry? Like, what service are you going to provide in industry? Right? Or what exactly are you providing back to the society that you came back from? And this is one of the questions that has come to me right now in my life this year. like I've gotten so much education from my master's, my PhD, from my postdoc. It's time that I give back to society. And how do I give back to society? We have to use our degrees to help our society. This is what I think that we should do. You can be in services. You can just maybe provide a service at your hospital. You can start a research trial, or you can work for an industry giant who's helping people or doing that, or you can just remain in academia. But eventually, I think that you have to know why you're doing science. It's not a prestige thing. To me, it's not a prestige thing to say I'm good in science and that's it. Then I sit at home and go like, yeah, I'm good in science. I've got a PhD in science. That's all. I think that we need to do more. We need to give back. And this is my advice to people who want to come into my field of study. Know why you're doing it. Know why you're there. And you have to think at the end of the day, do not let people just think for you. Think for yourself, like, why am I here and what do I need to do? What do I want?
Such important advice. And I hope somebody takes it to heart and they do reflect on why they're doing it, because I know I'm guilty of doing it because of, like you said, to run away. I'm doing it. I'm studying because I want to run away from poverty to be able to have to expand my my CV so I can be competitive. You know, all of those very, if I can say, selfish reasons. And then later on, you know, you have to really understand, like, okay, fine. Once you've gotten all of those things, and then what? And
exactly, yeah.
And I think everything is different for everyone. You know, for me, for somebody, it might be like for you, like wanting to go and give back in terms of cancer research this way. For me, the way that I want to give back is do it through this podcast, you know, so it's different.
This is quite nice.
Yeah, it's different. There's no straight and narrow. And I think it's very important for somebody to reflect on on how the intellectualness, is that even a word? The intellectual ability, the intellectual ability and all the smartness, like how does it then impact society? And you know what? It's been such a beautiful conversation with you today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope the people listening are inspired. I'm inspired. And are motivated to do more than just get their degree, to do more, to impact change, to do so many amazing things because we are capable. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Anne, for having me, and this was great. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. And to everybody else who's tuned in, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, and with an E. Until next time, goodbye.